Welcome to Paulogia Live, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians live. Or at least when YouTube lets us. Apologies to everyone who tuned in at the original scheduled time, only to find that there were some technical issues on YouTube's end that prevented me from going live. Normally, I would have said it's my fault, but it was, according to Twitter, lots of other people were having the same issue. So I'm going to take one and say this was YouTube's fault. But welcome back for those of you who are coming back. Hopefully, if not, you're catching me on the replay. And welcome to those of you for whom that original time didn't work and for whom this was some kind of blessing in disguise. And I'm sorry, my voice went weird. Of course, everything, as soon as something technical goes wrong, then lots of other things go wrong as well. So we're going to see how tonight's show goes. But if you're tuning in for the first time or you're not familiar with Paulogia Live, we like to split the program into two halves. The first half of the show is where we deal with some topics that I've found of interest and or maddening, to be frank, things that make me angry. Although most of today's stuff isn't in the anger category. We'll have to see. But I do actually want your help with that stuff. So it's not just the things that I find, the apologists that I am used to that I want to cover on this show. I would love to cover questions, thoughts, things that you guys find interesting or would like me to talk about that I don't normally talk about, which is why I've set up this email address over on this side, live@paulogia.com, where you can send me something short, though. Tweets, short articles, TikToks, Instagram, short YouTube video, like 7 minutes or less probably is all we can handle on the show like this. Send those my way, or maybe it's just questions or something in your life you'd like me to talk about, and we can do that. But and then the second half of the show, we take your questions, and I'm hoping that in our discussion of these initial topics that it sparks some debates, and I'm sure that today's topics are going to spark some thoughts, especially once we get to Art Ehrman's closing from the debate that happened this last weekend. But we want to start with something a little lighter than that first. In the lieu of the Ken Ham Answers and Genesis Answers news, they kind of start on a light foot. I like to do the same thing. I like to start with something not quite so heavy. So some of you may recall that on last Friday, it premiered my discussion with apologist Frank Turek on the Unbelievable show. And Friday evening, we had a lovely discussion show. I hope you were here for that. If not, when this is done, that'd be a great thing to go fill your evening with Dallas Wade, with Vice Rhino, with Morgan, and with Emma Thorne. And we were all discussing how well or poorly I did in my discussion with Frank. But one of the things that came up in that, it was a slip of the tongue, I had several, was that Star Wars was created just to create toys. Now, it's kind of true, a little bit true. I mean, that is one of the big driving forces of the franchise, of course. But it was not originally conceived that way. It was originally conceived as a story that was an homage to many of George Lucas's favorite genres and stories. And he wanted to tell it in his own sci-fi, fantasy, opera, space opera style. Anyway, some people in the chat were commenting how maybe religion was really just there to sell things as well. And then, so something came across my Twitter feed that made me kind of interested. Where is it? There it is. Someone named Phil Gonzalez wrote, Walmart is selling this $180 6-foot flush Jesus Christ, and I will need all the strength of heaven to keep from purchasing this holy boy. Wow. So of course, I can't take a tweet at its word, so I had to go find it. Now, Walmart is no longer selling this. It did have it in stock, no longer is. And it also seems it was also on Amazon here. So we get pictures of the kids creepily looking at the Jesus. Wow, you're supposed to be having fun with your 6-foot doll. And as I mentioned on Twitter, there's probably a whole section of adults, maybe some single ladies, who may enjoy something like this as well. Since Jesus is supposed to be in purity culture, Jesus is pretty much your romantic partner as it is. Anyhow, I just thought it was fun and cute that Christianity also has their toys that they're trying to sell from all the work. The other topic I wanted today also inspired from Twitter. Unfortunately, as some of you know, Ken Ham is not really doing Answers News anymore, which puts a whole damper on me doing Ham and Egg News episodes when Ken's not there. So I have to get my Ken Ham fixes vicariously through Twitter, where of course I am blocked because I exist as a human and he seems to have blocked everyone. But if you go incognito, every once in a while you can see what Kent is tweeting, and today he was tweeting this. Now it makes total sense to look at it because Kent is taking a look at this Fox News article, which is normal for him, and it's New Jersey. People are complaining about the crazy sex ed curriculum that is being planned in New Jersey. So before I even really paid attention to what Ken was saying, of course, I had to go click on the article to see what was going on. Sure enough, Fox News. Oh, let me get rid of that. Fox News is complaining about a video that tells kids that masturbating a few times a day is a healthy way to relieve stress. Of course, that's the whole story. It has to be, right? That's everything. That kind of headline isn't just for shock value. Turns out that in the 5th grade, so kids that are around 11 years old or so, in some sex ed curriculums, they were introducing some video content. One of the videos that they were promoting, whether you identify as male, female, genderqueer, or something else, you are perfectly normal. And there are lots of ways to manage puberty so it can be fun, exciting time rather than scary or a stressful one. This is the kind of message that Fox News thinks is negative. And then there was, of course, this video. One of the videos was about masturbation, male and female, and the whole video was really just trying to tell you that physically, it is a thing that you can do without harming yourself. There are other warnings in there about it as well, but the notion that I was once led to believe that that there could be lots of physical ramifications for any such activity was, of course, verboten, and it did have that quote that they said that a couple of times a day can be good for stress relief. I don't know if that's good for kids or not, but anyway, it's not the end of the world. And there was this third one, sexual orientations explained, and one of the elements in the video. Let me see if I can find it. I don't see it right there. Basically, in this video, there is a mention that if you are feeling like your gender identity doesn't match your body or your birth sex, that you should perhaps seek out someone to talk to, and that perhaps, and it does mention that puberty can be delayed for certain people if that's something they are interested in doing. So just mentioning any of those things, all bad. All that stuff's bad. And of course, none of that's a surprise. It made perfect sense to me why Ken Ham would be complaining about this kind of curriculum in a school. But then I actually read his tweet, and it connected with something else that's going on with Ken Ham. Let's read this. Bring it back to the bigger review. Here's an idea for Christians. Move to northern Kentucky and work at the Ark Encounter Creation Museum and send your schools to our truly biblical worldview Christian school, 12 Stones Christian Academy. Word Christian is in there a lot. Don't let the pagan state raise your children. So Ken is piggybacking on what most of his viewers would see as terrible sex ed curriculum, and he is trying to spin it for his own benefit, because I happen to know that Ken Ham is having problems hiring employees. He's having such a massive problem that he's actually had his supporters, I'm on their email lists and things like that, um, really in prayer about this problem that they have not being able to find people. And he put out this article related to that titled Cancel Culture. Once again, cancel culture, nothing to do with the fact that he can't hire people. Issues facing our ministry, blah, blah, blah. And the number one, so he complains about deplatforming and woke culture, of course. But this all comes down to being in a war. And he decides to, here, I'm just going to have my complaints about cancel culture, and I'm going to relate that to our current labor shortage. And he gives a few reasons why they can't seem to hire as many people as they want to. First of all, yes, there's a labor shortage across the whole country. That makes sense. Christian colleges. The other thing he's blaming now is that most Christian colleges no longer teach young earth creationism. So therefore, when the students come out of these Christian colleges or if they're for their summer jobs or whatever, they can't sign the statement of faith anymore because they don't believe in young earth creationism. Oopsie. The woke culture, of course, just an anti-Christian environment, permeating culture. Again, that would have nothing to do with his employees, though, as you know, for those of you who've been following me for a while, everything from the janitor right up to second in command to Ken all have to sign statement of faith, all have to say that there'll be no cursing, no sex before marriage, like just all the things that go along with Ken's. Oh, and of course you have to agree to young earth creation, all the things that Ken's version of biblical authority goes. And here's the challenge. The items above make it seem so what we're doing, we need housing for many of them. And here's where the good news turns into potentially bad news. So of course, I would be excited that Ken can't find enough workers to keep his place open because it shouldn't be open. Ideally, the marketplace of ideas would have that place, no one going to it. But if they can't find workers who are in the local area, specifically where they can find young people who are willing to be paid for free, and we'll get to that, who are willing to work for free, who hold to his worldview, he doesn't have housing. So what's this exciting opportunity? Read things that we need your money for. Ken is planning to work on, let me scroll ahead to get to the punchline. Ken is working on a campus where the employees of Answers in Genesis will all live at the Ark and live in these little compounds, and that'll be subsidized for the people who work there. So Ken can now get a hold of 16 to 20 something people around the country who, before they get into college, can come and work for him, get away from home, live on their campus, abide by their rules, and have a job. This is his new extension of all that they're doing. So, of course, I feel incredibly terrible because when I was 17, I was exactly the kind of person that was like, I'm going to move to live where the Ark Encounter is, and I'm going to take one of these unpaid internships that Ken is offering. I'm not going to get into the details of the article because I think you probably get the gist here. Ken is now moving from just doing the attractions, and then he expanded to this school that he alluded to, but now he's actually having hundreds of young people from around the country live right there so that they can indoctrinate them 24/7 with this stuff and also get essentially free labor. So that this is going to be first offered to their interns. Now, I did scour. Some of the interns are paid, some of the internships are not, but I'm assuming they're going to take money out for room and board. It sounds like that's what they're going to do. These people would be basically moving across the country to work for Ken for free. So that's a pretty good hustle if you make it happen. Or what do you think? Maybe am I overreacting on this? Maybe this is great news because we're excited that Ken Ham can't get the workers, and we don't care that he's planning to bring in lives to destroy more directly than normal. Maybe that's fine with you. I don't know. Or maybe I'm not looking at it the right way. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the super chats. And we can talk about it more at the end of the show. Or the second half of the show. Next, next up is it's kind of uh, it's kind of nice. So last week we mainly focused on people on YouTube apologists who were talking about me, and it was a little more me centric than I wanted. So I was trying to avoid that this week. But then another video came online. It was also talking about me. I came across this video on YouTube called "A Response to Gary Habermas." Response to my chat with Paulogia and questions to Paulogia. Well, I saw this. It's a little channel. It's got 3 subscribers. It's got 11 views. Like, oh man, I would. It seems like this was someone who's responding to Gary Habermas. Sure, I'd want to chat with this guy. But unfortunately, John 17, he has his. Can't see it. But he has his chat disabled on this. So there was no way for me to reach out. So the only way I can reach out, and it's Joshua, and we're going to chat, is through this show. So I'm hoping that eventually Joshua will see this, and you will get your chat with me that you were wishing for. Now, the fun part is that this is someone I've spoken to once before. Some of you may remember this little segment from, I think it was October of 2020, when I was on the Atheist Experience with Matt Dillahunty.
Jacob in the UK is calling in specifically to prove the resurrection. And it's a perfect call for Paul. So here you go, Paul. Welcome, Jacob.
Hey, Jacob. So some of you may recall that call because it's been the source of some round and round with some apologists. It was, and I got some people hot and bothered. But this is actually Jacob from that call wanting to have a round 2, and I love that. Let's see what he has to say.
I thought it's best if I address this because my name's been brought up, and that's fine. I'm happy for my name to be brought up. Gary Habermas did a video responding to the call that I made into the Atheist Experience when I talked to Paulogia and Matt Dillahunty
on this subject.
So some of you may recall that Gary Habermas and Ehrman-Licona did their own breakdown, takedown of this call. And in that call, in my view, Gary was actually somewhat condescending to the caller.
These guys just are not given the best data. And what bothers me the most is it seems to me when a caller doesn't know the whole case, you don't expect the callers to know the whole case. It's not their job. They want to lead them to believe there's nothing, no story here, no story there. And you're going to hear that in just a second here. And I think Mike's going to want to address what Paulogia says about the Apostle Paul with no statements on his appearance.
Okay. So the setup is that Jacob called into the Atheist Experience, Jacob from the UK. We had a lovely chat, and Gary Habermas took exception to the call and said a lot of weird things. Jacob remains a Christian, but he wanted to set the record straight on his side of things and to ask me some questions. So let's see what he wanted to tell me.
Both Paulogia and Matt Dillahunty were both very nice, very gracious. We had a very nice conversation. We had a very open conversation, and it was a really good chat. If you want to just type in on YouTube, Atheist Experience, Jacob UK dying for a lie, that's interesting. So yeah, it would be really good to see that. But what they said in the video was basically the 10 of the 12 disciples died for their faith, which is what I was taught in church. But we don't have any evidence for that. We only have evidence for 2 of the 10.
Well, just to clarify there, we shouldn't say, be wrong to say, and hopefully I didn't say that we have no evidence. What we have is we don't have any good evidence for 10 of the 12. We have legends from centuries later that are highly embellished, and most historians don't, even Christian historians, don't think happened. So there's no evidence. That sometimes gets thrown out too much. But that's a minor correction. Jacob, carry on.
2 of the 12 who died. We don't have evidence for 2 of them. Rather than 10 of them. Okay, hands up. That's fair enough. I learned a lesson. So, I don't really know what else to say apart from that. I learned a lesson.
Isn't that great? So he called in. He had a perception from his church of some facts that he thought he knew as facts. We had a talk about it. He's now since gone away, investigated the actual facts, and come to conclude that, hey, those couple of atheists, they actually told me the truth. So no harm, no foul. He's learned more. He knows more now than he did when he called in. So that's great. Love it.
But Paulogia and Matt Delahanty were really nice to me about it. But in the video, they was talking about Paul and James, but Paul and James weren't part of the 12. There were 4 that we got evidence for. That's Peter, James, son of Zebedee, James, brother of Jesus, and Paul. James, son of Zebedee, and Peter were 2 of the 12, but Paul and James, the brother of Jesus, were not part of the 12. But 4 of them died for their faith.
No, that's not quite correct. 4 of them, we have evidence about how they died. For their faith is actually quite a bit of a stretch. We don't know. So with my martyrdom criteria requires that, of course, we know why they died, and that perhaps that they were even given a chance to recant and didn't. That's how you know that what they died for. It's my contention that Peter and Paul died because they were caught up in Nero's conspiracy, Emperor Nero's just Christian scapegoating. And of course, they were the leaders. I don't think Nero cared one bit about what they believed. And James, son of Zebedee, and the James, the brother of Jesus, again, James, the brother of Jesus, in my reading, it's entirely a political / job-related death. And James, son of Zebedee, is the only one that's left where it's, even then, we have next to no record as to why. So I don't think they died for their faith, but keep going.
So, for me, that shows me personally that, that shows me why, if them 4 were willing to die, there must have been something that happened to them to have it. So
I would agree that the 4 of them put themselves in positions to be persecuted and killed, and that something happened to them. The question is, what happened to them, and what is the difference between them being, if we want to tell about this being sincerity, if this is a mark of sincerity, what's the difference between being sincerely mistaken and actually correct? What difference would there be in the evidence from one to the other? And as far as I can tell, they look exactly the same to history.
But then if Paul had a PTSD, because Paulogia's video, which is really, really good, which don't know why you shouldn't become a Christian, it's a good video, and I really enjoyed watching it. And obviously I really enjoyed talking to Paulogia. But there's just 4 questions that I would like to ask him.
All right, I'm here.
If he ever watches this, I'm not sure if he ever will or not, but if he does, it'll be great, and I'll be really happy to have a really good chat with him again.
Cool.
But there's 4 things. First of all, Peter had a post-bereavement hallucination. The Apostle Paul had a PTSD, guilt-induced hallucination.
So I'm hoping that I didn't come across, and I hope I don't come across anyone, that I am obstinate in saying that is what happened. Someone needed to start Christianity before Paul came around. I think Peter is the most likely candidate. And that one of the things, among many things, that could have led Peter to be mistaken about Jesus is grief hallucination. And there seems to be pretty good correlation between what we know about Peter, if the Gospels can be trusted at all, what we know about Peter and what might create a grief hallucination. Similarly, we do know that Paul claimed himself to have an experience, so we have more of an idea of what Paul claimed. Clearly, it was some kind of vision, and PTSD stress might fit the data, but it could be 100 other things, so we don't know. But those are 2 very mundane, naturalistic reasons that those 2 might have gone around thinking that Jesus was risen again when he wasn't.
James, they all had the same hallucination about the Son of God. That's still, I'm not aware of anything else. I'm not aware.
So I hope I may have paused at a funny spot. He was saying the other two Jameses, what's up with them? Why did they believe? I'm not convinced James, son of Zebedee, we can have any confidence at all in knowing what he believed. So let's put him out of the picture. The two we do know because Paul met them. James, brother of Jesus, and John, the apostle John, son of Zebedee. Those two, Paul met so that they knew something. If you watch the video that I put out today with a couple of doctors talking with Sean McDowell, they talk about the myriad of cases, in many cases, where a delusion spreads because one person's conviction and compelling stories can actually draw other people into their own delusion, and it starts to become a shared delusion. These do not require that the people share a hallucination, that they see the same thing. It's well researched and common, well studied, where people can basically pass on stories and people can get caught up in the moment and feel like what they're experiencing, is equally there. So that's, again, quite very plausible for John and so many Jameses. James the brother Jesus, John. That would explain that. They don't need to have had the same hallucination as Peter and Paul. Hopefully this is answering your question, and I jumped ahead from where you're going. Let's see where your question's going.
Anything else like that happening where four people have been willing to die for something that they've seen?
So again, I do not think we have evidence that those four people died in any stretch for what they saw. They died basically for being troublemakers. All four of them. They didn't. There's little to no evidence, I would lean on next to none, that they died for what they believed.
Paul did die a faith-related death. So did Peter. James, son of Zebedee, again, was he really, but
cool. So you agree with me on James? Yeah, awesome.
If they're willing to die for something, it shows that they were sincere. And if four people sincerely believe that they saw the risen Jesus, then that's quite powerful in my view. Also,
okay, so Jacob, I would love to chat with you, and I'm hoping that at the end of this we can figure out a way to actually make that happen. You can maybe comment on this video. You can email me at that live email address that we had at the start of the show. Lots of different ways you can get a hold of me, and I would love to chat with you more about this. But before we do, what I would love for you to check out is, did any of the men that you just talked about actually tell us what they saw, what they believed? Is there any historical record for any of them leading you toward these conclusions, or are you once again basically coming to these conclusions because your pastors and teachers told you, much like the first time you called in? And let me know what you find when we chat.
That video, it talks about most scholars don't know about the early four Gospels.
Right.
Most scholars don't agree with who don't know who wrote the Gospels, but Irenaeus, who was a really early church father.
So his question is it going to be about gospel authorship here? Irenaeus lived around 180 AD, so a good 150 years after Jesus died. So that's not super early, but I mean he is one of the earlier ones, but 150 years after Jesus died.
Said that Revelation, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and John were all written by the same man, and that's from Irenaeus.
So, Jacob, what I'd love for you to do is go find where Irenaeus said what you just said he said. So you said that Irenaeus said that Revelation, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and the Gospel of John were all written by the same person. As far as I'm aware, you won't be able to find any place where Irenaeus said that. I have found, and I'm aware of, a place where Irenaeus said that the 4th Gospel was written by the Apostle John. That exists. But I'm unaware of Irenaeus talking about the book of Revelation or 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. So, but you might have a source that I don't know about. So maybe someone in the chat can help if I'm missing something, or you can, when we have our next conversation, you can let me know where you found that information.
And Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John. So if Irenaeus...
So Irenaeus says that he was a disciple of Polycarp. That is correct. Many people believe that Polycarp was a disciple of John, but Polycarp himself never says that he was a disciple of John. Polycarp, we have not only authentic writings, there's definitely a letter from him that almost all scholars agree that was authentically from him. We also have a biography that was written of Polycarp from around the contemporary times. And we also have forged letters that were allegedly by Polycarp. None of those, whether the authentic or the inauthentic, none of them say that he was a disciple of John. So that is something that emerged later and is not very well attested. So I would love to know what your source is for that, and whether you think the source for that chain of custody, as J. Warner Wallace would say, is strong. For me, it's not very strong. I feel like that if one of the disciples was my mentor and I was writing about Christianity, I would probably say so. I know that you can't, that's a bit of an argument from silence, but it is a place where you'd expect it. So, for example, if I was to write a book about Star Wars, and I spent 7 years working for George Lucas, but my book about Star Wars never mentions that I worked at Skywalker Ranch or on the films, that's a strange omission that I would have failed to have mentioned that I had a direct connection to the direct source. So, Jacob, yeah, definitely let me know where you think you're finding that info.
Saw those scriptures as scriptural, and he saw them as inspired scripture written by the man who discipled his teacher. I think that's a powerful thing that Irenaeus believed that, because he's a very early church father. And Polycarp also quoted from Paul as well.
Okay, there's a lot there. Polycarp didn't quote from Paul. And again, so Irenaeus wasn't very early. He was 150 years after Jesus. And we don't have that connection with Polycarp and John that you think we had. So what I've got is a guy who lived 150 years later, who is basically lending his own authentication to a book that it was already at that point circulating somewhat with his name. It wasn't much earlier than that, but at that point it was. So I'm not going to count this yet as strong evidence, but perhaps you have something more.
No, so Polycarp also quoted from John as well.
So interestingly, Polycarp did not quote from John. Polycarp quoted from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but never from John, which again is incredibly strange if his mentor was John.
So that's just my video, and yeah, I'll just see if it gets anywhere. But if not, then no problem. But yeah, it'd be great to have a chat. All right, thank you very much.
So Jacob, if you end up seeing this, I would love for you to get a hold of me. Leave a message in the comments, email me at live@paulogia.com, and let me know who you are. Let me know somehow, or maybe you can open up comments on your video. I'm sure everyone here who saw it will be very friendly and lovely to you. So yeah, get a hold of me. I'd love to chat. Maybe we could even continue this chat somewhere on screen if you cared to, or we could do it privately. Anyway, Jacob, thank you for that message. I love your heart. I love the direction you're thinking. I love that you're trying to investigate your faith to see whether it holds up. And that is something that I wish I had done far earlier in my life. So congrats on that. And yeah, let's keep this conversation going. I hope the things that I said, if you can go check those out before we talk again, that's awesome. And anyone else in this chat, do you agree with what I said? Did I say anything wrong? Let me know. Did it spark any other thoughts? And next topic. So anyway, on to next topic. Yes. We'll get a hang of this show eventually. So as many of you know, on this past Saturday was a 7-hour debate between Bart Ehrman and Mike Licona on the death and resurrection, not on the death, on the resurrection of Jesus and the evidence for it. 7 hours. You've seen me advertising that on the channel for a while. It is actually still available. It's now available for replay if anyone wants to go check that out at tinyurl.com/BartDebate. But I was in the chat for the whole 7 hours, and a lot of people were asking, would we see anything new? So to be honest, and I'm going to cover this more on the channel. Actually, let me know in the comments and let me know in the super chats how you'd like me to cover this debate. I'm not exactly sure what I want to do. If I want to do it too long, didn't read, or if I want to go point by point, I'm not sure. But I'm going to cover it more in the debate. But was there anything new? So I don't think Mike Licona brought anything that if you haven't read his long 700-page book that you wouldn't have heard before. But of course, not everyone's read his whole book. Anyway, so Mike didn't say anything you hadn't heard him say before. But it was eloquent and the interaction was great with Mike. Bart, his opening was solid. His opening was by far the best version of his case that he's ever put forth, as far as I can tell. I've read most of his books. I read his blog almost every day. I've read a lot of Bart Ehrman, and this was his best version of the case against the resurrection that he personally has put forth. It went a little weird from there, but again, it was his best version, but it wasn't things you couldn't have pieced together in other ways. So that was a little bit disappointing. Some of the Q&A brought out some new information, which was nice when Bart and Mike went at each other a little bit. And probably the highlight for most was the section of the questions for Megan Lewis, the moderator, Megan from Digital Hammurabi, and she asked them some really tough questions. And questions that made them think about things beyond the case that they had prepared. And I thought that was a great hour for getting some new info. So that was worth it for sure. But, so we're 6 hours and 55 minutes into this debate. Imagine we've been there all day, 5 minutes left. There's just 5 minutes left and then we can all go home. A lot of people did go home. A lot of people left already. But it was down to Mike's closing statement and then Bart's closing statement. And oh my goodness, Bart went off script. I've never heard him say anything like the 5 minutes that he gave in the closing statement. And I was so taken aback. I'm not sure I caught it all the first time. I even had to tweet about it. I'm like, oh my goodness, that closing statement was fire. I mean, it was crazy. It caught everyone off guard. I've now had a chance to listen to it a few more times, and I still think all those observations hold. But it's a little bit fire, maybe for reasons that I didn't initially realize. And I think there's a lot for us to discuss and nuance to be found in what Bart said during his closing statement. So what I'm going to do, unfortunately, I can't just play the closing statement out, but we're gonna talk about it. Hopefully, you can piece through what exactly is happening. I'm going to give a little bit of my take of what's going on, but this was Bart Ehrman, unlike I've ever heard Bart Ehrman, and I think there's a lot just for we as a community to figure out how we feel about some of this stuff.
I am going to end on a serious note. I want to end by saying what is ultimately at stake for me in this kind of back and forth. Why would I care if conservative evangelical apologists think that they can demonstrate that their faith claims are true with the implication that the faith claims of everyone else are wrong? Why don't I just say, no, I don't think so? Well,
so I'm now hearing that as very interesting phrasing. Why should I care? Why should I care if evangelicals can say that they've proven their case? Which is an interesting way to think about it. So when I'm debating the resurrection, people may ask you, why do you care if people are Christians? Or why do you care about trying to prove it wrong? Or why do you care if they hold on to beliefs that maybe aren't true? Bart's phrasing there specifically was, why do I care if evangelicals can prove their case and therefore prove other people wrong? I didn't catch that the first time.
here's why. We live in a remarkably diverse world. There are some people who celebrate our diversity. Not everyone has to be the same. I agree with that attitude and the actions that result from it.
So nothing to disagree with there, I don't think, right? We live in a diverse world. Yeah, check. Those of us who are not Christians and those of us largely without faith. Oh, I'm sorry, Bart, that's a bad freeze frame. I'm going to change that. We don't feel like we need a homogenous world. I don't feel like I'm on any kind of mission to make everyone think like me. I think that would be terribly boring. What my personal mission is that everyone examines what they believe and comes to it through good reason and good information, as opposed to indoctrination or appeals to authority or bad information, right? My main thing is I want people to come to true beliefs. So I'm not looking for homogeny there necessarily, because I don't think we're all going to come to the truth in the same way at the same time. I think we can all agree the world is diverse, and that's a good thing.
People are equally valuable.
I should back that up.
That result from it. All people are equally valuable.
All people are equally valuable. That is an interesting statement that seems on its face to definitely be true. But the more I've been thinking about it, depends on how you define valuable, I suppose. I think that all people have value, and I think that all people are equal in terms of the rights that we should share. Everyone should share equal rights and ideally equal opportunity. That would be amazing. But are we all equally valuable? I guess that depends on how you value it. So, for example, I value my children more than I value strangers that I've never met. And there's I think you probably all think of other examples where you say, oh, well, maybe depending on how you define value, are we all valuable? And we're going to get to that a little more, but you probably have some ideas in mind of maybe that's not entirely true, but I think we can all agree we all have some value. We all have value, and we should all share rights and opportunities. At least that's my perspective. Maybe I'm wrong, but see where we go.
And no one should be opposed for who they are, for their race, sex, gender identity, nationality, economic status, political party, philosophical ideas, life choices, or religious beliefs and practices.
No one should be opposed for, and then there was that list. So I was definitely nodding along. No one should be opposed for things that they can't change, things that they didn't choose, right? So where you were born, or your race, or your gender identity, or your sexual orientation, or any of those things, right? The things you don't choose. I think most people say that that's the line where you shouldn't be opposed to people for things they didn't choose. But that part went into things like ideology and political party and life choices. And it's like, man, I can think of those are things that people do on their own. And I think that some ideologies should be opposed, and some actions should be opposed. And I'm not sure if I can follow you here, Bart. But let's see where he goes.
A huge fan of live and let live, with one caveat. I draw the line in harming others.
Oh. Well, in hindsight, I wish he'd opened with that. So he has a caveat that he draws the line at harming others. So if we rewind all the way back, the first, he said everyone has equal value. And I started to think about things or equally valuable. And I started to think of people that maybe harm other people. And that might make someone less valuable to me. Try not to use the World War II example. Even just a murderer, right? It might might be less valuable to society than someone else because they do harm. So great, Bart. So okay, so all those things you said, the caveat is so people don't do harm. So I would agree that, you know, if people have different ideologies, I don't want to be necessarily opposed to them unless they do harm. That makes sense. Or if we're political parties, you know, we will disagree at the point where they're doing harm. Cool. All right. So harm. We're if harm is the standard, I wish you'd have started with that. But let's see where you go.
You have no right to do that. What has that to do with this debate? Many of the people I love and hold dear, family and friends, are believing Christians. None of them thinks they can prove they are right and that others are wrong. If they did, they would not be my closest loved ones.
Wait, okay. So none of his family or some of his closest family and friends are Christians. None of them think they can prove that they are right and therefore prove that other people are wrong. But if they did try to prove that they were right or wrong, Bart wouldn't be close to them. That's kind of weird. That's basically Bart's laying there some level of certainty. He's basically saying that if you are a tentative Christian, or if you hold it more loosely than others, that's the standard where he would say that that's okay. But that, you know, a certain dogmatic level of Christianity is the type that's harmful. I'm going to need your help to actually put all these pieces together, because I'm not entirely sure where all these pieces are. I'm just identifying them at this point.
Throughout the course of history, religious people who are passionately persuaded that their views are right and others are wrong have opposed those of other persuasions because they were different.
Okay, so that makes sense. Throughout history, Christians and other groups have opposed other groups because they were different. Totally, you'd have to agree with that. That's a no-brainer. And Bart's a history teacher, so he would have seen many examples here. But isn't that different than saying Christians oppose people because they're different, versus what he just said before was Christians oppose people because they think they're right and other people think they're wrong? I think the whole othering idea, when you other people and want to persecute them because they're different than you, I don't know that requires any level of certainty of being right and other people being wrong. I mean, certainly it helps. I'm not sure this is hand in hand. I think we might have done a bait and switch here. We might have conflated a few things.
Christians against Jews, Protestants against Catholics, Sunnis against Shiites, Hindus against Muslims, evangelicals against Mormons, and religious people against those different from them in race, sex, gender identity, national origin, or anything else. The big problem I have with conservative evangelical apologetics is that it is an attempt to demonstrate that its views are not only acceptable and helpful, but that they are factually right, and they alone are right.
Okay, so Bart's come back. So he's doubled down. This is where he's at. So he thinks that the big harm for Christians in Christianity and in believing in the resurrection is this idea that the Christian group is entirely certain, and that has therefore, and that their mistreatment of others comes from that certainty. Is that what he's saying?
That means everything else is false. Those who think they can prove the resurrection may not be meaning to put other people down and to be marginalizing and insisting that they conform to their version of the truth, but in fact, they are doing just that. Even if they are really nice guys and gals otherwise who claim otherwise.
Okay, so this is the big claim that actually got me excited, and once he's done, I'm going to talk about this a little more. But this is a germ of an idea, right? So even if you yourself are not actively persecuting others, that just by holding an idea to some extent, you are doing some harm. It's an interesting idea. Let's see where he goes.
For them, all other religions are wrong in their various ways. Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Shintoism, Jainism, and go on and on. And for the evangelical Protestants who take this approach, all other Christians are wrong. Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and those liberal mainliners, and on and on. They're not only wrong, they are destined to eternal punishment, either torment or annihilation.
I did enjoy Bart's list there. It went through the various religions. But then I think he correctly identified that the kind of evangelical, at least that he's familiar with and that I grew up being familiar with, would largely consider other Christian denominations to be equally as bad as any other religion. May as well not be Christians at all. So I thought it was interesting that he included that. And so certainly there's evidence for what he's saying. We've seen evidence of all those groups treating each other poorly. Of course, what we haven't quite seen yet is the difference because they're others, because we all are suspect of others, people who are different. Or is this tied in with this certainty about the resurrection?
As Mike himself has alluded to. These other people are opposed to God, so ultimately God is opposed to them. God favors the ones who agrees with the apologists who will have eternal bliss.
I get why that's dangerous, right? If you think that God is on your side and that God is against the other people, that gives you perhaps some blanket permission to take some actions or think some thoughts that you may not have naturally outside of this belief system. But if you feel like you're being commanded by a God who is right and he's against those people, then of course that justifies you being against those people. I'm using those people in the most general sense of meaning just any group that is the opposite or an other to what your group is. Where you going, Bart?
Few people know what this kind of exclusivism has done throughout the course of Christian history, but the stories are not good. And now, since the Enlightenment, oddly, I must say, Christian apologists are children of the Enlightenment more than just about anybody. Now, since the Enlightenment, these other views are not just wrong, they can be proved to be wrong. This can lead and has led and does lead to injustice, oppression, and suffering.
Okay. So since the Enlightenment, we've had better tools to evaluate ideas, better epistemology, and because of that, Christians tend to think, in Bart's view, Christians tend to think that the other worldviews are now more disproven than they were because of these new epistemological tools, evidence evaluation and the like. But as far as a Christian's concerned, their worldview still stands. So since the Enlightenment, Christian views have become more certain, and they've become more certain that others are wrong, and this has led to a lot of the othering that Christians do today. I think that's where Bart is at right now, at this point in the speech.
I am not saying that Mike is persecuting others. I know he and his fellow apologists think they're doing good for the world.
And of course, a sincere apologist does. So a sincere apologist, I think, would rightfully say that if other people are going to hell, if they are going to eternal conscious torment, that trying to stop them from going there is the most loving, good thing that they can possibly do. And like Ray Comfort and others would say, there's almost nothing out of bounds. If I'm trying to save you from falling down an elevator shaft, it's okay to tackle you to the ground and maybe injure you. That's an analogy Ray uses. So it's okay if here on earth Christians are bludgeoning a few people and making them feel bad or physically harming them even, because the end goal is to save them from eternal damnation or annihilation. So I believe that, yeah, Christian apologists think they're doing something good, which is a bit of a problem depending on how you're looking at this stuff.
And the ones I know best, including Mike, are very, very good people themselves. But the views they hold in the end are harmful.
It's very interesting to say, if I pull my Frank Turek out here, which I was just speaking with him last week, what do you mean by good, Bart? If you say on one hand that Mike is a good person, and on the other hand, at the same time, he is unconsciously harming people, or even consciously harming people, by what standard? Where's the good? What is your definition of good here? I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's kind of important.
Even in our day, whether it's their intention or not, these views have led and continue to lead to suffering for women, opposition to people of color, gays, lesbians, bisexuals, transsexuals, and others with non-traditional gender identifications. They have led and continue to lead to opposition, sometimes violent opposition, to good, decent people of other religions and even of other kinds of Christianity.
So that was, of course, the applause, right? That was where I was like, that's hot. That's great, because that is one of the major problems with Christianity and other religions, is the list of people that Bart just listed there, the types of groups that Bart listed, are actively harmed by those groups. Of course, that's not an exhaustive list by any stretch, but wow, it was cool to see Bart in this debate about the truth of the resurrection to pull that list out and to call Christians out, since about half the audience were Christians, to point that out, that this whole resurrection thing is not just resurrection, but there are ramifications to people's lives. So definitely, for me, that was an applause moment. I think we still need to sew up some of these other details before we know for sure how well he did.
That's not right, and it's not Christian.
Also funny that Bart just called them, what the actions you're taking. Christianity necessarily leads to these types of actions, necessarily, because of the way it is. Can't see my hand. But doing so is not Christian. It's not the way, I guess, maybe it's not Christ-like. I don't know. It's kind of funny.
Often I get asked why I do these debates, and this is why. And after I debate, I get asked, why did I get passionate about it? And this is why.
All right. So that was Bart's statement. So if we look at the pieces that were laid out there, Christianity, and as far as Bart's concerned, the solid affirmation that a person is absolutely correct, therefore everyone else is incorrect, is the thing leads to othering, which is inherently bad. I think he would use the word bad, because it does harm. And so in Bart's view, it's interesting, because what he's saying is that simply by holding the belief, he didn't elaborate why holding the belief leads to the harm. He said it's supporting a worldview that does those things, but it's possible, like possibly Mike Licona himself isn't actively out, doing some things. I don't know that. Maybe Mike is actively out doing some things that we would consider harmful. Part of the problem here, of course, is in your definition of harm, and who's harmed and at what level. So what made Bart's speech powerful was that, of course, we can identify that there are marginalized groups that Christianity and other religions marginalize. The church has done things based on race. They've done things based on sexual attraction and on gender identity. Undeniably, all those things, the church has done harm in individual instances, if not systematically. So, but I don't think we can demonstrate yet from Bart's statement that simply holding the belief does that. Now, I got excited because I hold my own version of an anti-theist view. And I also hold that simply simply holding false ideas, to some extent, in and of itself, holding those false ideas is harmful. Now, I don't go so far as to say that the harm that is done by holding false ideas automatically leads to harming other groups, though it can. So one of the things, but the harm, I feel like the harm that is automatically done by religion and by holding any false idea is the harm to oneself. It's the harm that the holder is doing to their own life, to their one life they have. So, for example, if I have a false belief that cake is good for me, and I keep acting on that, then I'm going to keep eating cake thinking that's going to make my body healthier. But it's not. That's a little bit maybe silly. But anytime, I suppose you could also imagine neutral things, right? You can imagine, let's say that I think that Bart Ehrman's car is green, and that's a false belief because Bart Ehrman's car is really red. Did that false belief harm me in some way? Well, no. Where the harm comes is having false beliefs that impact other decisions. That, to me, that is the extent where one can say that simply holding false views is harmful. On top of that, having poor epistemology like I used to have when I was a Christian, sometimes you need to have bad ways of coming to things to hold those false beliefs, and that bleeds over. So we often see, I'll just speak in my case, I was suspect of science in general because I held to the view that the world was 6,000 years old. Scientists say otherwise. So scientists are wrong. And if they're wrong on that, they're probably wrong on all kinds of things. They're probably, and you can imagine the litany of scientific things that Christians tend to, and other religious groups tend to deny, right? They come up with these ways of thinking that are based not on kind of evidential standards that I might wish they would use. And of course, some of those decisions that you will make based on those false beliefs impact other people. They will impact perhaps the way you vote. They may impact the way you look at someone when you encounter them in public. It may cause you to say something to the people in public. It may cause you to lobby for certain actions or certain rights to be granted or taken away based on, again, all these false beliefs. So I think it's more obvious in the cases Bart was talking about where someone has these false beliefs that it leads to harm. But I kind of feel like the root of it is the harm that's done to itself. I just lost this next part of what I was thinking. Oh, and then the other thing, of course, is that it creates is the more Christians there are who are moderate in their view, like the kind that Bart only wants to associate, like his family. Bart only wants to associate with people who don't think they can prove Christianity's true, but hold to it anyway. The more moderate people who carry the label end up acting as shields and PR people for the people in the group who hold the worst ideas and often the most fundamental ideas. So if Mike Licona is indeed, and I'm sorry, Mike, to use your example, if someone's out there is a kind person and is the kind of person who would not knowingly harm an individual, even though, so indirectly their actions might be harming groups without being aware of it. That kind of person, again, by carrying that label, ends up softening that for other people and makes it harder to weed out the really harmful ideas. So those are just a handful of ways that I think that holding false beliefs leads to harm. And I don't think that it's tied to certainty. I don't think it's tied to knowing. And I don't think it's exclusively tied to the othering that happens. And othering undeniably happens. And I'm glad Bart spoke up about it. It was, I think, something that was probably shocking and good for all the Christians in the audience to hear, to maybe evaluate their own actions and their own attitudes and that kind of thing. Though I'm guessing that the debate didn't necessarily change too many minds about whether Jesus resurrected or not, so I'm not sure what impact it had. Anyway, so Bart's statement was all over the map, at least as far as I'm concerned. But I feel like a lot of people are going to disagree with my take on this. And so I would love to hear either in super chats or in comments on the video. What do you think? I think this is just the start of a conversation that probably I should start having more to. I took a long time trying to figure out the philosophy of morality and figuring out what does Big Bang mean and what does evolution mean. A lot of that things, probably an area of my general worldview that is less developed than others, is exactly the nature of holding religion in harm. What I definitely know I don't believe is that holding religious views is a mental illness. Please do not go there with me. That I'm solidly affirmed on. I did not become one iota smarter. My IQ didn't go up one single point. My mental health didn't improve or change when I went from believing what Ken Ham believes to being a atheist activist. None of those things changed in my life. And you're only doing yourself a disservice if you are out there saying that any of this stuff is related to mental illness. You're harming those who actually do have mental illness and further reinforcing the stigma that really is a huge problem in people getting the help that they need and healing they need. So let's not go there. But other than that, I do think my worldview could use some refinement on this harm thing. I think I'm on the right path. I think there's something inherently harmful with holding an idea, but that would need, of course, to be balanced against the harm of holding other ideas. Not all ideas are created equal. The idea that that everyone of a certain race should be exterminated is obviously a worse idea than the idea that Calvinism is more true than Molinism, right? So there's a spectrum here. There's a lot of stuff to be had. Anyway, I was thinking about doing another story, but I think that we have gone long enough for those ones. I will save Ben Shetler perhaps for next episode. Let's instead head on over to the super chats and see what folks have been saying and whether they wanted to throw some input in. Just a few today, which is thank you so much for everyone's support and for showing up at the stream at the wrong time, not advertised. I'm so grateful everyone's here, and for all of you that are watching, I'm really enjoying this live stream. Thank you for your patience, for me getting slightly better at it each time as we go, and for the growth of the channel. If you're not already subscribed, please click subscribe. I appreciate you all. Let's see what input we've got. $5 super chat from Robert Harrison. Does Ken say whether he will be piercing the live-in intern's ears with an awl? So for those of you who don't catch the reference, in biblical slavery, when you had a slave for the allotted 7 years, you were forced to let them go. But one of the loopholes was if they chose to stay. Now, one of the reasons they might choose to stay, of course, is that if you give them a wife and kids, you're allowed to keep the wife and kids, and you would just be sending the slave off. So if that slave wanted to continue to live with them, they would have to volunteer to continue. And in that case, that would be indicated by marking their ear, piercing their ear with an awl, which is a sharp little tool. So well said. Yes, Ken is creating his own little slave labor compound. Kent Hovind is the one who had the compound of slave labor. I'm very shocked, actually, that Ken Ham is going the same route, and troublesome. It's very troublesome. Thor Rasmussen, right? Oh, Thor Rasmussen became a member. I guess I'm seeing member stuff in here. Welcome. Thank you so much for becoming a member. I do need to talk about this a little bit. I'm very much interested in knowing what my members would like to see for avatars and icons, because I've only loaded up a couple. So please leave a comment here if you are a member or would like to become a member. What avatars would you like? So I think currently up there is myself and Shannon and maybe Ken Ham. So we could have other apologists. We could have guests who've been cartoonified on the Paulogia show. We can do facial expressions from me now that unfortunately you get my facial expressions. What would you like? Let me know. All right. Morgan Marks writes, "Hey Paul, love the live channel and VODs, or VODs as the cool kids say, which are videos on demand, and that's just what we at YouTube just call videos." That's the Twitch people. Everyone from Twitch calls them VODs. But thank you so much. I've actually been very gratified that people are watching these live streams after the fact. I end up getting more views afterwards, which isn't always the case. So hello, those of you who are watching in the future. Gnostic Informant became a member. Thank you, Gnostic Informant. He lurks, right. What sources have you used to learn all this? How do you determine trustworthy/untrustworthy sources? What would you suggest to learn like I have? Wow. That's a really big epistemological question. So the sources I've used to learn all this went in stages. So the first thing I had to come out of was young earth creationism. So I had to first read all the young earth creation literature I could. Now this is where I cheated, and this is where I would suggest, if you want to sort of cheat, what you can do is you can ask people, you can figure out which are the books and the sources that most people are talking about. So, for example, I just Googled, what are the best books on young earth creationism? And most of the churches pointed to Ken Ham's Answers books. So I cheated. I took a shortcut. I went and I read Ken Ham's based on them just being popular. But another way to cheat is so Wikipedia is normally a bad word, right? Most people say if you're using Wikipedia as a source, you've done something wrong. But I tend to differ, and a lot of people differ when you want to say Wikipedia is a great place to find out what the primary sources are. So skip the article and go down to the footnotes. And the stuff that's listed there is usually a great place to start on any given topic. Because usually they have to cite, because it's community edited, right? The best sources are usually cited. Whether or not those sources are good doesn't matter, but at least you know you're getting a good sense of what's at. And then, like, what makes a good source, that's really tough. You want to look for credentials. You want to look for their reputation. You want to look for, unfortunately, the artifice of being credible is easy to achieve these days. It's easy to make a website or a blog or a research article or whatever that looks like a real one when really you're not. So how it looks isn't a great way to do it. But if you're talking about scientific papers or philosophical papers, one of the best things you can do is go to scholar.google.com, look up the article, and what you want to look for there is the number of citations. So every time that one scientific paper or a peer-reviewed paper on any topic references another peer-reviewed paper, that becomes a citation, and that gets tracked. So one of the things you definitely can tell is the papers that are cited the most often tend to be the ones that are most relevant. They aren't always necessarily the most trustworthy, but you know that they're the ones that all the other people in their field are referencing. So, I mean, those are some basic tips. It's hard, and I'm not by no stretch am I really perfect at making sure that all my sources are good. I guess the other thing to do against it, which was my strategy, was to read what I was told was the best arguments from both sides at any given topic. So whether it was evolution or whether Adam was a historical figure or who wrote the Gospels or is the Old Testament prophecy actually prophecy, like what you want, if you're reading the best from both sides, then you are probably doing yourself a good service so that you know what's there. Unfortunately, in our world, best often looks like most popular, and most popular isn't always best. But if you start with the most popular, at least you get a sense. And that's probably a long, rambling answer beyond what anyone needed to hear. But, yeah. From Tegan Hillman. $5. I want to thank you for your content and for being supportive on Twitter. I plan to, wow, that's an interesting take on what I do on Twitter. I try to be supportive, but also Twitter is so YouTube is where I primarily put my effort and my work and the messages I want for large people to receive. Twitter is a little bit of a guilty pleasure for me, and it's where I do Twitter a little bit for myself more than I do it for others. But I thank you for. Well, I'm glad you felt supported on Twitter, shall I say? I plan to post my first video that's coming this coming weekend. Oh, please, 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 tag me when you post the link to Twitter. One of the things I'm always excited about is new people doing content, because my voice is not the only one that should be out there, and the voices of people who've been doing this for a while are not the only ones that should be out here. Diversity in voices, diversity in attitude, diversity in all this stuff. For example, I'm sure a lot of people have very different takes on Bart's closing, and all those things need to come to the light so that we can get a good sense of it. So yes, please tag me, mention that you were the one that super chatted, and I will check out your first video and maybe leave a comment and thumbs up. We'll see. I already read Morgan Marks. Thank you, Morgan. Oh, I guess I just skipped the other one. All right. Bethany. Shannon says I have to sleep on the couch. Oh, man. I wonder what I did this time. There's probably 40 reasons. Eeks. Okay, sleeping on the couch tonight. So, yeah, I'm in trouble. Maybe I should keep the stream going. Oh, Bethany says, oops, just kidding. Okay, good. Good. Because I prefer to sleep in the bed. That's awesome. All right. Old Man Joe writes, here's the sofa sleeping fun. Shannon, be nice. Wow. Okay. There must be something to this. I guess I'll have to use my method and determine what the source of this is and what the truth is. I need to figure out how to pronounce your name. I don't know if it's an I or an L, but low PNC1 or I own PNC1. Can the dog be cartoonified? So Bella, it has been cartoonified actually. It was in an early video, my first year, I think, where she was barking away and I just couldn't remove I wasn't skilled enough at the audio editing to get her barking out. So I actually drew a cartoon of her. So she tends to be, I also put her in my, each year on the channel birthday, which is around December 15th, I put out a picture of all the cartoons that have been on my show. And Bella is in and amongst those, usually in the front row. So if you want to find Bella, you can look for one of those birthday pictures. Or I guess go through my early content. I'm sorry about my early content, but Bella's in there somewhere. Super Wood Putty says, hello from future great VOD. Thank you. Yeah, I hope it's great. And Helix writes, I feel that free will is a dead concept. How important do you think it is for Christians? Problem of evil. Should we push harder against that idea? So here's the problem with free will. As I see it, I'm not a philosopher. I'm not an expert. But I look at people like Sam Harris and others like him who tend to study free will as the ability to have chosen otherwise. So free will is not about whether we make choices, because we undeniably make choices. But so do coin sorting machines. Coin sorting machines make choices. They put quarters in one spot and dimes in another. Lots of things end up making what look like our choices. The question is, could we have chosen otherwise? And a lot of Christians want to say, well, let me go back in time. If I went back in time, sure, I could have chosen otherwise, because but they fail to think about the fact that what that means is that you would have no extra information, with all things else being equal. So the temperature of the room, how hungry you were, how thirsty you were, how tired you were, what the room smelled like, where you were standing, like just every possible thing that affected you, consciously or subconsciously, when that decision was made. Like you may say, hey, I decided to go for orange juice instead of apple juice, and I could have gone either way. No, something ultimately was a tiebreaker. And the question is, could your brain have broken the tie otherwise? From as far as I can tell, no. Like if our decisions are governed by our exact situation, as well as the state of our brain at that millisecond where the decision is made, And the millisecond before, you might have made a different decision. And the millisecond after, you might have made a different decision. But at that millisecond, the inputs, I guess I just think that our brain is materialistic enough that that's sufficient to have made the decision, to be the factors that make the decision. And if the factors were exactly the same, our brain would make the exact same decision. So is that important for Christians? Yeah, that's super important for Christians. Christians want to deny that up and down because they feel like that if you were determined like that, like if you're basically an elaborate coin sorting machine, then you don't have agency. And if you don't have agency, then God is unjust in punishing us for actions that we ultimately didn't have anything to do with. So Christians just simply can't let it go. So they want to define free will some other way. And that's fine. In any conversation, you need to figure out the definitions first before the conversation is meaningful. Much like I talked about recently with Kent Hovind and his evolution debates. They're not meaningful because he's not defining evolution the same way his opponent is. So it's meaningless. It's like, again, my example of, well, cake is healthy. And I define cake as, sugary baked goods, and someone else defines cake as carrots. Well, we're going to come to a different conclusion about whether they're healthy, or at least we might. So free will, it's all about the definition. If you use the definition I gave, I don't think we got it. And yeah, I think that's real. Sorry, and problem of evil, I think that's tied up again with what I said. If we don't have, I agree, if we don't have free will, then God isn't just in punishing us, or again, allowing evil, all those kind of things. So that is a big problem for Christianity. So they can't afford to have it. I can't say your last name. Rich Jagodzinski. Welcome as a member. Appreciate that. This engineer for $5 writes, "Hey Paul, I just randomly remembered that our first collab together tackling Genesis apologetics, attacking the Lucy fossil. Good times. That was good times. That was on your channel. I'm pretty sure. Was it? I don't remember. We did a couple videos quick back to back, but yes, those were good times, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with you again soon, hopefully. Wink. Tease. Yay. John's been a good friend for a long time, and I appreciate, for those of you who are new creators, you know that John and Casey are regularly welcoming. They're the first in the welcome wagon for everybody, and they're the first to give up of their own needs if someone else needs something. And I was the beneficiary of that when my channel started. John was one of the first to welcome me and not see me, not see me as competition, but see me as a friend and see me as someone who could just as a good person. And so I appreciate that a lot. That was in those early days. As those of you who start with small channels know, it's a little scary and you don't know anybody. He was one of the first to welcome me. So thanks, man. Appreciate you. All right, Ven, $10. Thank you, Ben. That's very generous. I think one of the worst harms that Christianity inflicts is to say there's no more dialogue. This is the answer. It stifles learning and growth, which snowballs into so many other problems. You are not wrong. And that is probably partially what Bart was getting at. Because if you are adamantly saying that Christianity is 100% true, and the flavor of Christianity that you are convinced is true, everything else is shut down. If you are the kind of Christian I was, man, for someone to even say, hey, what do you think? What if Matthew didn't write Matthew? Like, I would have stopped talking to that person. You just can't ask questions like that. That's not fair. That's out of bounds. So I think you're onto something for sure. Stopping conversations is a big deal, and we need to always keep them open. LopNC, some fonts are dumb. Thank you for, I'm hoping that LopNC is how you want it pronounced, but I appreciate that because the I has always been confusing. Appreciate that. All right, and with that, I think we are done on the super chats. We are done with our main topics. So thank you for sticking with me for this evening in the late times. I hope YouTube doesn't do this again to us. I think it's a long time before they... Anyway, I'm new to the streaming thing, so it's always bumpy. But I appreciate you sticking with me on this journey. So comment on the video, like it, and subscribe to this new channel. It's different than the old Paulogia channel. And I will see you next time. Later.